Now, since I'm doing double duty and triple duty, my brother in good, Simeon Banister, is supposed to be here to moderate this panel.
And he is.
And he is. Oh, I love it when a plan comes together. I love it when a plan comes together. Simeon, just thank you. That CEO thing is no joke. Sometimes you get called and you have to respond. And I just want to say, Simeon, 2 nights ago, Heather McGee, what she did was outstanding. I don't know how many other Rochesterians were able to be in that. I think it was almost 2,000 people, but just the kind of content I think is almost fits, the theme of this conference. Again, empowerment, equity, and certainly the accountability part. So, Brother Simeon, I yield to you to take control over this panel and do your thing.
Terrific.
All right.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here this morning, and my pleasure even more to be here with such a august panel of insightful and passionate and caring individuals who have something to share about some of the key issues that we're describing and talking about this morning. Not only are they passionate, caring, and smart individuals, they're also friends, and that's always nice to get a chance to chat with your friends. And so with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Ajamu Kitwana, who leads the Community Impact Team and is Vice President over at ESL, Charitable Foundation. Beverly Fairbrooks is with us from M&T. Robin Wilt is a town council in Brighton and also a realtor. And Brennon Thompson is with the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. And why don't I start off with a question for all of you, and we'll just take it in the order that I introduced you. We want to start with a personal question. Why is the issue of closing the racial wealth gap important to you? Ajamu?
And so much, so much there. I'll try to be brief. But really, closing the racial wealth gap, the obvious, I'm Black. I said on another show, I've been Black all my life. And in many ways have dealt with, worked with, been a part of, and seen, first the challenges of just, and I'm from South Side Chicago. So first it was violence, as a lot of individuals see today, just the challenges of getting by with my mom and brothers, et cetera. And as I've grown, matured through my education, profession, et cetera, and gained perspective on why the experiences I had as a Black boy on the South Side of Chicago were so different than the experiences I eventually moved and lived in the suburbs in Maryland. And it was 2 completely different worlds. I experienced and lived completely different worlds. And the folks in the suburbs had zero clue as to the reality of my colleagues in the South Side of Chicago, and vice versa. So it was clear that there are dramatically different worlds in the United States, and those same different worlds we know play out in Rochester. And as I gained perspective, for me personally, as you asked, Simeon, really, I believe the challenge, the racial wealth gap is the linchpin, is the key differentiator that sustains the legacy of racism, of slavery, et cetera, and perpetuates it in a way that, the meanest person, all the other things that are also bad. And so the impact of the racial wealth gap is so important as I gain perspective. So this is why this issue is important to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Beverly? And you're on mute, and while you're coming off, I will restate. Tell us why
sorry about that.
Gap is important to you.
Well, as Ajamu said, it's obvious, as a person of color, as a Black person, why it's important to me to start with. But also for me, it's another way to be able to honor God and to honor my parents as well as my grandparents, and what teachings they had provided us with growing up to understand who we are as a people and the capabilities, they always made sure they let us know, about how society was in terms of people of color as opposed to whites, in the majority, and making sure that we understood how this world at that time was working, but also encouraging us to know that, that it doesn't stop there, that there is hope, and that, whatever you choose to be in life, you can accomplish that. So for me, it's just another way to honor them and the teachings and how that affected me internally as I, became an adult, as I went off to college and made my way in this world. And it has always been something for me personally that I'm passionate about, to be able, as I succeed, to help others succeed. And it's really important. It's something that we need to make sure that we understand ourselves and even hold ourselves accountable. That yes, as we achieve things for ourselves, to be able to encourage others and give them that hope, to know that there is hope and it can be accomplished. I don't care what the barrier is, that we need to be able to work together and to strive to do our best, to be the best, and to help others along the way. So it is important for me because there are a lot of people that exist, people of color, Black, Hispanic, and beyond, that do not understand that, there are things out there that they can accomplish, and there are things out there that we can achieve if we work together.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Robin, tell us, for you, why is this issue personal, the racial wealth gap, and getting it closed?
Well, like our previous two speakers, closing the racial wealth gap is a matter of personal importance to me, as I literally have skin in the game. But I think back to when I was little, and my parents used to tell me that I needed to work 3 times as hard to earn half as much of anything as my white counterparts had, whether it be income, grades, or status. And I think they understood very clearly that the deck was, in essence, stacked against their children. And before I finally began having children when I was 30, perhaps naively, I never thought that as a parent, I would have to impart that same exact wisdom as my parents did to me as kids, than to my kids. And I think it's disheartening to have to tell your kids that, largely because of structural inequity, that they will not have an equal shot at achieving their full potential in life as their similarly positioned white peers. But the numbers don't lie. Similarly positioned Black families earn 76 cents on the dollar of that of white families. And when you combine that with a home ownership rate that is half that as among whites, and home ownership being the biggest facilitator of wealth accumulation, and Blacks being systematically denied that source of wealth through racist policy, Black homers, and also the unfair valuation of Black homes. My parents knew, and I know, that my kids are disadvantaged just by the unfairness of a system that doesn't acknowledge their full worth. And I think because of that, I've made it my mission to work at dismantling those unjust systems that necessitate parents having to explain to their kids that simply because of the color of their skin, they're going to face structural disadvantages to achieving their full potential.
Thank you so much, Robin. Brennon, Thompson, tell us why closing the racial wealth gap is important to you.
Thank you, Simeon. And I will also add just a brief note to my bio. I'm now with the National Association of Realtors. I'm in DC, but Rochester is always home. And
Brennan, we have a song about that. It goes, moving on up.
Well, for me, what is happening in Rochester is also really important. And I'll echo some of what the other panelists said. Being at the National Association of Realtors, home ownership is a huge focus. But personally, as you said, for me, I'm a white guy, and I sit on the other side of that privilege. But also the impact on me as an individual and on white people as a whole of segregation, we don't communicate enough the loss, the moral loss, the moral injury that does to white people as well. And the racial wealth gap is not a people of color problem. It is an us problem. It is a we problem, a problem that we all have to solve, and that we're made worse because it exists. I grew up in a suburb of Rochester, had the life experience that I'm sure you could probably picture and imagine, and then coming to realize just the disparity that does exist in our own backyard, that, you know, being someone from the area, having gone to school in DC and then coming back, authenticity of place is really important. And as Jerome laid out in his keynote, and as I'm sure we're all aware, your zip code is the biggest determinant of your health, of your opportunities in life. And homeownership is your biggest asset in that accumulation of wealth in the quote unquote American dream. And so that seems to be the thing that we need to be addressing. And that's why I'm in the position at the National Association of Realtors.
Thanks so much, Brennan. For folks that are listening, I'm really struck by some of the themes that we just heard, particularly how the experiences in youth really shaped. We heard about gaining perspective in the move from Chicago to Maryland. We heard about honoring parents and reflecting family values, about having skin in the game, and about how this is an us and we problem. Really fascinating. Robin, one of the things that's interesting in your bio is that not only are you a real estate broker, but you're also an elected official. And because of the systemic nature, you mentioned dismantling this system. Share with us a little bit about how those worlds overlap relative to closing the racial wealth gap and the steps you're taking.
Yeah, there's a massive overlap between the role of elected officials and the real estate industry in terms of addressing and closing the wealth gap. I've already discussed how home ownership is a huge factor in wealth accumulation. There's a strong correlation between who controls the land and who controls government. Both real estate and elected officials help to determine who has access to property within the confines of their respective jurisdictions. And I think that connection is explicitly articulated in the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics preamble. It begins, under all is the land. Upon its wise utilization and widely allocated ownership depend the survival and growth of free institutions and of our civilization. And I think the dual role in which I serve enhances my ability to connect how the policies that we dream up in the halls of government and the discretion that we exercise in appointing and recruiting and hiring people to positions within government have the practical effect of perpetuating or ameliorating the racial disparities in access to wealth that are lived by the people with whom I interact. And regardless of which role I'm currently serving in, both real estate and being elected public service are two exploits that are predominated by our nation's legacy of racial injustice. There's massive underrepresentation of Blacks in both fields. And in real estate, Blacks represent only 6% of agents on the national level, and we represent only about 2% of agents locally. And Blacks are similarly underrepresented as electeds at the state and local level of government. So yeah, in both areas, we're integrally involved in land use and allocation. So one of the things that I advocate for is increasing representation in both fields. One of my favorite political figures is Shirley Chisholm, and she famously said that if they don't give you a seat at the table, then bring a folding chair. So we need to increase the number of Black real estate professionals. And as a caucus within the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, I'm a co-chair of the Black Caucus, and that is an integral part of our mission. And I also work within government to address the issue of underrepresentation, because our zoning laws and the decisions we make with regarding how to allocate the revenue that we raise through taxes on the local level have an impact on the ability of different groups to build wealth, or in turn hoard those resources at the expense of other groups. And we've done some things in Brighton in terms of using incentive zoning to help structure a more equitable built environment for our community.
Yeah.
Through incentive zoning agreements, we can incentivize developers with variances to build more affordable and accessible housing units. And so those are the types of things, these types of intersections I see between government and real estate.
Yeah, really critical. This idea that the land is under us all and who gets to lay claim, powerful concept. Beverly, speaking of which, and speaking of who gets to lay claim, last year your colleague Dan Burns was with us and shared some of the commitment that M&T is making and intends to make. In December of 2022, the New York State Department of Financial Services did a report on redlining. M&T placed 4th and 5th on mortgage lending in majority BIPOC tracts and mortgage lending to BIPOC borrowers. Share any of the plans, things that you have underway regarding outreach to BIPOC borrowers as a means to improve the number of mortgages that are going to BIPOC residents.
Well, you know, it's really interesting. When I looked at that report and saw, you know, where we were out of a group of 25, you know, to be ranked 4th and 5th, and you think, oh, well, you know, let's pat ourselves on the back and, you know, we're doing pretty good. But you know what? We don't look at it in that term. We look at it as, okay, what can we do, even if ranked 4th or 5th, to be better? How can we do better in the community? How can we make sure that we're really making more of an impact in the BIPOC communities, amongst BIPOC individuals and households? And so M&T Bank, we continue to strive to do more. We continue to do more outreach in the community to, you know, really reach and understanding what the needs are in order for those who want to be homeowners to become homeowners. We want to be able to have a better communication and build trust in the community through our outreach efforts, whether it be through our workshops, our homeowner workshops that we provide, it's the standalones where M&T is putting them on, or it's in partnership with some of our community partners who, you know, that's their primary goal, is helping potential home buyers to become homeowners. You know, being able to do more of that. It's really important that we understand truly what the community needs are, because before we can sit back and we can hear and read all the reports about the needs of the community, we need to make sure that we understand and know what those needs are. You know, we can read a report, it can tell us, but you know, to be able to communicate directly with the community, whether it's through the churches, whether it's through just holding those standalone workshops and being able to talk directly to individuals to find out, you know, what the challenges are and what they want. How do they want to see M&T Bank in the community in helping them to achieve their dream of home ownership? So being able to communicate, being able to outreach and make sure that we're connecting, building trust, communicating, clearly understanding them and the households, and the households understanding who M&T Bank is and what it is that we're trying to do. That's really, really important. Even on, and I know the report covered, you know, Rochester, included Syracuse, which is also a region that I cover, and other areas. But, you know, throughout our footprint, we are, you know, making a collective effort with our community partners, and even beyond national partners. Just recently, in the past year, so M&T Bank has partnered with the NAMBA, the National Association of Minority Mortgage Bankers of America. And we have become a partner, and we're working to become a accredited social impact lender, and getting a certified in that manner. That certification includes a playbook on how to serve people of color, home buyers who are, out there looking for more and looking for more from us as well as other lenders. So, being able to take on partnerships like that locally in the communities, whether it's working with some of our community partners out, the housing partners out here, or working, as I said, with community groups, municipality, the city of Rochester, city of Syracuse. This is important. Being able to really get into the heart of the community, to establish a relationship, and also creating products, mortgage products that are going to ease the process and be less confusing for folks who want to understand and want to obtain their home ownership goal. So, there are a lot of things that we're doing out there internally with our own individual employees, making sure, because when we talk about people in the community, some of our employees, they're from that BIPOC community, making sure we're communicating even more internally to understand how we can work together with our employees who are a part of the BIPOC community, and hearing from them what it is that they would like to see the bank doing and working to make these things come to fruition. It's so important. If you're outreaching, you've got all these products and services to offer, that's one thing. However, if people don't know that you have them, that's totally different. We will continue to do that outreach and continue to build trust. It is so important. We cannot forget to listen to the voices in the community and understand what they truly want to see from us, and then us analyzing ourselves. There's that accountability factor, is making sure that we understand where we need to be and showing up even differently. We've always had this great outreach effort, but how can we show up differently in the community? You mentioned Dan Burns. He's our regional president for the Rochester MSA, and Dan has been active and getting out and speaking at forums like this and other venues to let people know that M&T Bank, not only do we have the will, but we are making the effort. And so it's things like that will help us to hopefully climb up that ladder to go from number 4 or 5. Hey, let's be number 1. Let us be number 1. Let us be that trusted bank that our people in the community know that, hey, if there's an effort, if there's a will, there's a way, and we can work with M&T Bank to be that bank, that company that is committed to the community to make it happen.
The will and the way. If folks are interested, you can find the reference report at the New York State Department of Financial Services website. It's a report on redlining. Speaking of will and way, one of the things that my brother has just truly been impressive on is bridging the resources between the foundation at ESL and the bank itself. Ajamu, I just want to invite you to talk a little bit about the things that you've been working on with the community impact team to interact with the mortgage side of ESL and some of the impact that you guys are creating.
Great, with pleasure, Simeon, and absolutely at ESL overall, we share a purpose to help our community thrive and prosper. Our community impact team, in fact, about 2018 or so, shift positions. We operate the charitable foundation, but we intentionally created a team at the credit union with the intent and purpose to drive community impact. And we lead that team. Philanthropy is one of our major tools, but we also actively work with our mortgage team, our business banking team when it comes to rental affordable housing, our product team when it comes to, Beverly mentioned a critical piece from the banking industry. We can do all we want, creating products and offer this and offer that, but if the people aren't receiving them, if they aren't qualifying, if they aren't benefiting, we have to be aware of that and be intentional about designing to meet the needs of the community. I do want to, and I'll speak to that more, I do want to just touch on the previous question that my colleague Beverly and M&T spoke to about the report. The report was eye-opening. I commend the Department of Financial Services for putting out the data. Simeon, you, Jerome, we know in our collaboration, the power of putting the numbers on the table is really important. And it's clear that we as a community have a great deal of work to better serve, in this case, minority, Black and Brown households. It's clear that there's an opportunity for us at ESL to do more, and that's part of our reflection. And to that point, when this report came out, community impact team, along with mortgage and other teams within the organization, we certainly noticed and have begun conversations to continue conversations. We've been working for several years on a strategy to drive impact in the area of quality, affordable housing, homeownership being a critical piece of that. But having this data, having a third-party perspective on it, I think is really important. Conferences like this one today is really important to push the conversation and support those stakeholders like financial institutions, as well as appraisers, et cetera. We'll talk about others, to really get some perspective on the contribution they're making, but also not get too caught in navel gazing, et cetera. And I'll just mention a couple other things that we've partnered with the bank on to drive impact. The first-time homebuyer grant we've developed, which specifically targets Black and Latino potential homebuyers in the greater Rochester area, came as a result, again, of looking at data of some of our previous affordable homeownership programs, and frankly, realizing, again, to Beverly's point, you may think that they're serving Black and Brown homeowners, but we found that the access to theirs looked just like the rest of the market, and as a result, developed this targeted program. We heard a lot about structural racism and the legacy that we're combating. I wasn't the first to say it, but I think the reality is we cannot reverse race intentional exclusion program with race neutral policies. There's a lot of work to do if we want to address the racial wealth gap. We want to address the impacts of structural racism. So taking the opportunity that is legal for all financial institutions to really target the specific challenge of Greater Rochester is something that we did, again, in partnership with our mortgage and product teams at ESL. So I'll pause there.
Yeah, actually, Ajamu, I want to invite you to continue just a little bit more to talk about the special purpose credit programs that are allowable under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. What we understand is that they provide a way for financial institutions to meet the special credit needs of people that have been impacted by lending discrimination and systemic racism and redlining. And so as you're kind of helping to frame up and helping us to understand some of the specific interventions that financial institutions can take for populations that have been discriminated against, can you help us to understand a little bit more why that special purpose credit hasn't been commonly used by some of the financial institutions?
Yeah, no, great question. And thanks for that question and the opportunity to speak to this. Our host today, Jerome Underwood, spoke about it eloquently this morning, the will to do the work. It's one thing to talk on a panel, to put out a statement about Black Lives Matter or what have you. It's a whole different thing to really organize the resources within an institution for commitment to change. That special purpose credit program has been in existence for years. All financial institutions, banks, credit unions, et cetera, can use it. In fact, it was developed specifically for the opportunity to address specific data-driven disparities. So it's not a freedom to discriminate, reverse discriminate. It is, in our case, a program that's specifically designed to address the documented homeownership gap between African Americans and the average and whites in Greater Rochester, between Latinos in Greater Rochester. And as part of the program, we monitor, in fact, it's a requirement of the program that participants monitor that gap such that the justification, which is targeted at closing that homeownership gap in this case, is used to justify the program. So it's 100% legal for all financial institutions. Why it's not used more, I think the will is a challenge. I think if an organization, we did have to use our lawyers and use our product team. It took resources to design and set up this program. So an organization, a financial institution, has to be sufficiently committed to invest in developing and create a commitment. It's got to be more than just a marketing or PR effort. It's got to be a real commitment from the organization. I hope we will see more financial institutions making that level of commitment, but it takes an investment. And the fact that there's an investment, the fact that there's some perceived risk, I think for many financial institutions has unfortunately perhaps deterred those that may otherwise have been interested in leveraging this existing law.
Thanks so much, Ajamu. I want to pause for just a second and remind folks that we have a Q&A, and so you can put your questions into the Q&A, and we'll be keeping an eye on those so that we can respond and work them into this panel discussion. We really want to make sure that we have interaction with you. We want to get your insights, and it's such a great group of people that have some real perspective, as you've already heard. One of those is Brennon, and Brennon, if I can turn to the work that you're doing at the national level, particularly as it relates to fair housing policy and programs. And of course, as you mentioned, I suppose as I mentioned mistakenly, you were at the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors and do continue to hold the place in your heart for our community. Be it in DC, be it here in Rochester, where on your radar are you seeing the opportunity, particularly through some of the fair housing policy programs to close this racial wealth gap?
Thank you, Simeon. And I'll say a lot of my excitement actually comes from what's happening in Rochester. And I would not be in this position had I not had the opportunity to be at the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, working with wonderful colleagues like Robin, one of our members and the co-chair of the Black Caucus, on these same issues. And so for me, like having a position working on policy and programs at the national level, sometimes can be that we're all of the DC folks are looking around at each other, but being able to have a foot in Rochester, be able to call Robin or my other colleagues and know what's happening with realtors and their consumers and clients on the ground is really important. But specifically addressing what's happening here in DC, Ajamu just mentioned, we were just talking about special purpose credit programs. That's something that's getting a lot of attention. But if we talk about the public will, there's been a 47-year lag on energy around special purpose credit programs, right? It's been law for 47 years. And in the last few years, there's some more attention and energy, and people are looking for guidance. The Department of Housing and Urban Development put out guidance for how these can be used. Because as Ajamu was saying, there's concern from banks and others that they have been taught to put policies, programs, products, they have to be race neutral. Right. And we understand that you have to have race conscious policies to address these gaps. And so that's an important piece there. I'll say, sir, other policy programs and things that we're looking at is when it comes to fair housing is specifically ensuring that people who can and should be getting into homes aren't discriminated against. So there's a dual mandate for affirmatively furthering fair housing. One is non-discrimination, and that second is integration, promoting and redressing some of the issues of segregation that we've seen. A lot of the issues we're facing right now is housing inventory and housing supply that is making it less and less affordable, pricing people out, making it harder for people to get into homes. So NAR is working with industry partners, whether that be mortgage bankers, builders, lenders, and appraisers and such, to focus on how can we, and I should also say the federal government, because we do federal advocacy, how can we focus on increasing housing supply? But when it comes to that, we also know that there are many households and families who are eligible to get into a home, not just affordable housing, but eligible to get into a home that may not. There are certain barriers in the way, whether their credit invisible because their housing finance system is out of date and doesn't take into account the kinds of things that would make a family, a household, a consumer eligible to get into a home. I should say that our housing finance system is predicated on discriminatory risk assessment, right? And not only that, the credit models that we have just don't account for example, rental payments, the biggest payment a household has every month that shows their credit worthiness. So thinking about things like that and how can we promote and support the use of alternative credit models. In addition, we're always advocating, again, at the very basic level, making sure that fair housing enforcement is well funded, making sure that people who are facing discrimination have resources and have redress for that. In addition to advocating for more down payment assistance to help people get into homes, as well as homeownership counseling, and then working with our members across the country. I'm excited working with our members in Rochester to make sure that we're, as Robin was saying earlier, making sure that the profession reflects our community. And I'm sure Robin can speak to that a little bit more, but that was kind of one of my one of the proudest things I was able to do in leaving GRAR was helping kind of stoke that fire.
That's terrific, Brennan. One of the things that I often hear in the discourse about housing discrimination in particular is that there's this temporal dimension, that it was this thing that happened long ago, redlining happened long ago. These issues were problems from yesteryear. We have a question that's come in about whether developers today are using restrictive covenants in new developments in Monroe County. And I want to append to that any reflections or any insights you might have about modern tools that are being used to effectuate housing discrimination.
I can't speak to any knowledge of what covenants may be used by developers today, especially in Monroe County. But I would say, we know that steering still happens in the real estate industry, that realtors, intentionally or not, have been caught steering. And that's something that we need to continue working on education, putting procedures and policies in place to make sure that that doesn't happen. And Robin was also talking about at the town level, the local level, zoning policies, right? It might be a facially neutral policy, but it's excluding people from opportunities and access. Those are two that I can kind of name off the top of my head, but I'm sure we'll probably get into more as the discussion goes on further.
Sure. So speaking of the discussion going on further, this is a question for everyone. You may know that in my background, I did some work as a commercial real estate appraiser. And two things really struck me about that experience. Number one, the fairly subjective nature of the appraisal field, that though the language often speaks to objectively looking at the market, a lot of times there's a lot of subjectivity. The other thing that was interesting was the connection and the kind of incentives because of some of the relationships with banks and developers and others. So I'm curious to hear the group kind of reflect on the mortgage industry, brokers, insurance companies, appraisers, banks, and even non-bank lenders. Is there any collaborative work from your perspective being done to address the opportunity of greenlining and or collaborative work across those industries to reduce the racial wealth gap? And why don't we start, Beverly, do you mind if I start with you?
No, not a problem. It's really interesting, over the years, I've had my hands in the mortgage field as I was the affordable housing officer for M&T Bank in Central New York for a number of years. And collaboration is key in this business. When we look at where we are in regards to the racial wealth gap, it is important. And it's one of the things that M&T finds important is to make sure that we are working with our partners in the community to be able to address this issue. And it is important. Why? Because, it's one thing to work individually to make things happen and bring about changes. But I find that, and the bank itself finds that when we collaborate, we can reach more people. We can be able to tell the story a little bit differently, and to be able to make sure that we fully understand. Because you can work with a partner on a particular issue, let's say, and you're coming from your perspective, but hearing from their perspective is important as well, because there are things that you're thinking of or haven't thought of that will come out to make it a little bit easier to get the message out to the people that we're targeting, to ensure that they fully understand what is available for them. I remember coming into this region 22 years ago, and going to some community groups and sitting in the meetings, and there were all different partners around the table. And we were talking, and I found that different groups were discovering what other groups were doing that they hadn't been aware of, or discovering that there are groups in the community they thought were doing one thing, but found out they were doing other things in the community that could really help the target audience that they were serving. So the collaborative efforts, very, very important, even when it comes down to getting a more diverse staff, making sure that we look like the community, the entire community that we serve. I'm thinking of right now, there's a Fannie Mae Future Housing Leadership Internship Program that M&T Bank has gotten involved with within the past year, and will continue here in 2023, where we're trying to connect with the different college students and bringing them in as interns and looking for folks with diverse backgrounds, and give them that opportunity to be a part of the housing industry and to learn more about it. And we're doing that, and we'll continue to do that in 2023. But that's one collaborative effort to be able to help address what the greenlining industry, and to be able to have folks from the community, in the community, be a part of this, to help us to clearly understand more of the approaches that we should be using when we're trying to help, and when we're trying to, whether it be if you're in small business, whether you're in, trying to achieve your goal of home ownership, anything on those levels, that it is important that we collaborate and try to make sure that we're communicating in such a way that people understand that we are sincere and we want to make a difference. We want to make more of an impact in this community. When we look at even with the city of Rochester, and reaching out and trying to partner with them on programs so that we can create more homeowners in this community, to be able to connect with, whether it be the county or groups like, Pathstone or NeighborWorks Rochester and other housing entities out there. It is important that we collaborate with them. We do some things around mortgage and financial education, talking to people to make sure people understand what is needed in order to achieve their goal of home ownership, understanding the importance of credit, understanding the importance of money management. So it's not just about having the product, but also being able to understand the challenges that one faces and trying to achieve these goals and these dreams, and making sure that we are in tune with what it is that they're dealing with. It's not just simple as saying, well, go out, clean up your credit and save some money, and there you go, come back and we'll, get you in. It's being able to, that communication piece is so important. By collaborating with others and being able to bring others into that conversation as well, to communicate so that folks know exactly what it is that we're trying to do and how we can help. And they are able to feel more comfortable and trusting us to share with us and other partners, to be able to make us more clear about understanding their needs and their challenges they're facing, so that maybe we can come up with a different solution. And how, so it's not just about putting a product out there.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Maybe it's
Right.
about
Yeah.
sitting down, coming into the community where you live, okay, and educating and sharing the information that we know. You don't know what you don't know.
Sure.
Okay. But
Yeah.
once that's made available to you, so the partnerships that we have in this community is very important. And I'd like to just take a step back and say, when we look at what we're doing, that includes what we give in the community on a charitable basis,
Sure.
because there are a lot of hidden gems in this community. Going out and looking and supporting programs, housing initiatives, where people, they're out there making an impact in the community, but maybe it's a well-kept secret. That's important too. So partnering, getting to find out who those folks are and partnering with them is very important.
Thank
And
you,
that's
Beverly.
what
We're gonna pick up on some of that in just a moment. Really appreciate this idea of building trust, and I want to invite others to reflect on just the connections in the industry between various parts of the industry and how that, really can produce this opportunity for greenlining and closing some of these gaps. Brennan, I see you with your hand up, and then Ajamu, I'll grab you next.
Sure, if we could just stay on appraisal for just one moment. So the National Association of Realtors has a base of appraiser members, and we're deeply engaged and recognize the challenges that are almost daily surfacing around appraisal, but have been longstanding. And for us, we're engaged with the interagency task force, the executive task force, property appraisal and valuation of equity. Then they put out recommendations at the federal level. And I think for this, Dr. Andre Perry, a researcher over at Brookings Institute, has done a lot of work in this area and actually recently published something I want to say about a week ago, some new findings. And we talk often about bias in appraisal and in individual appraisers. And well, of course, that is a piece of it. As a matter of fact, NAR has put out some, I think, really quality bias override training. That's kind of our staple for housing training as well. Dr. Perry in his research suggests in this latest round that only represents a fraction. The individual bias within an appraiser, can certainly be significant appraisal to appraisal on the systemic level, is a fraction of what's happening. And we need to understand what is behind the more structural and systemic piece that is causing this devaluation, right? And so it's something that we need to be really paying attention to. I will say that at the federal level, NAR is engaged with all of the stakeholders and partners trying to, and again, this is a conversation that we have in the office daily and around DC.
Yeah, Brennan, I just want to put an emphatic note on what you said. It's not just an appraiser. It really is much more systemic than just individual bias. Certainly want to be aware of it, but we want to be thinking systemically. Thank you. Ajamu?
Yeah, just to weigh in, one, I've got to look up, or Brendan, I'm sure you can share that recent report from Andre, Dr. Perry. I mean, absolutely, all of you, and as you said, Simeon, we're all friends and we work together. But those that know my and ESLs and our community impact work, we 100% believe to really make progress on these systemic changes requires a collaborative approach. And in this case, again, as Beverly, as Brennan mentioned, the role of the appraisers on this list, insurance companies, it was Wade Norwood, who was mentioned earlier, who kind of broke down for me some of the challenges in our majority Black homeownership communities of individuals losing their homeowners insurance because of the need for roof repairs, the delayed maintenance, which is a serious challenge in the homeownership stock, particularly in those areas that are majority Black or brown homeownership. So layers and layers of systemic challenges are a barrier in Rochester. And this is an area that there's an opportunity, I think. We unfortunately recently lost Brennon. Perhaps he was one of people who could help bring us together. It has been a pleasure to begin to work with realtors in the community, Brennan and Robin and others, to think about the relationship as a financial institution with their roles, but to have greater Rochester realtors, appraisers, bankers, really kind of breaking down and looking at the data. Right now, we're working and collaborating internally, which is valuable for us as ESL, but how powerful could it be for us to really break down and construct what actually is happening in our community with respect to disparities in home values, with respect to disparities in home purchases, et cetera, and to develop a particular strategy that's local to us, I think would be powerful and would accelerate all of the efforts that each of us are talking about and even committed to as individuals if we had greater insights into what's happening on these other sides of the system that are barriers to progress on this issue that we're talking about today.
Absolutely. Robin, you've come off mute. What do you have to say on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight just another area that we consider an objective measure of creditworthiness that we do not always consider as an institutional barrier to building wealth. And I know that Representative Ayanna Pressley is a sponsor of a bill that has passed in the House of Representatives to address the deleterious and also disparate effects that the credit regime has had on access to wealth among communities of color. And I don't think people realize that FICO scores are a fairly recent invention. They've only been around since 1989. And we know that credit scores can impact everything from where we live to where we work, to the level of education we can afford, and what access to transportation we have. And Ayanna Pressley's legislation, the Comprehensive Credit Act, includes measures that would make it easier for people to correct errors on their credit report, and would limit the use of credit scores for employment purposes, and expand the opportunity for borrowers to improve their credit scores, and restore credit to victims of predatory agencies, and do things like ban the reporting of debt when you're trying to access healthcare and things along those lines. So I think that a lot of these things that we just consider inherently part of the a system that need to continue really need to be looked at. And a lot of those changes to the credit regime were suggested by the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, which is a community of Black real estate professionals that was formed when Blacks did not have access to the National Association of Realtors. This was prior to the Fair Housing Act and our national protections against people of color within the industry. They had come out with a list of 7 recommendations. They do a report on the state of Black home ownership on an annual basis, and they have come out with a list of 7 recommendations that address all of these different areas that we've just talked about in order to reduce that wealth gap and address the issue of Black home ownership. So I would recommend that everybody take a look at that report because it has some very poignant recommendations.
I was going to make a joke about how Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian solved this with their Credit Plus, but someone told me the other day that sarcasm doesn't play well online. So I will refrain. I want to go back. Ajamu mentioned the challenge with how roofs, something as straightforward and seemingly as simple as roofs, have kind of underneath them this underlying challenge of creating instability in the household, undermining home insurance. It really has a terrible knock-on effect. And I will confess that at the Community Foundation, we've been doing a lot of work with Renew, which is a program to do kind of home interventions with support from ESL and others to try to strengthen the community in that regard by doing home retrofits. But it feels to me, I don't know if it feels to others, it's one of the most vexing things about this job. One of the most vexing things is I was on a panel a few days ago talking about education. So yeah, but education, we've got to really focus on education in Rochester. Well, in order to do that, if kids are coming to school traumatized and hungry, no, we have to focus on trauma-informed care, and we need to focus on food security. Well, but we can solve those when we have stabilized homes. So we need to focus on home ownership. Oh, wait, but to get a stabilized home, we have to focus on workforce development. But to get workforce development, we got to focus on education, and we're right back where we started again, right? And so it often feels like we're playing whack-a-mole. It's a very vicious cycle. Can you talk a little bit about your efforts and the work that you and the firms that you represent are doing to address equity across the social determinants of health?
I'm happy to jump in on that one. And I do want to give a caveat. I've got a conflict towards the end of this. I may have to drop off in about 10 minutes or so. But to address the social determinants of health, again, for us, we're designed to do exactly that. I'm our director of community impact. And with that, we make grants throughout the community. A couple of our areas of focus include education, as you mentioned, Simeon, also what we call building strong neighborhoods. That's the area where we focus specifically on housing. So supporting stability in neighborhoods, supporting neighborhoods that not just have stable housing, but also the amenities and character, that the leadership that creates a strong neighborhood. That's the program with which, as you mentioned, Simeon, we've been glad to invest in expanding the efforts of Renew and other roof repair and just home repair programs, which are gravely needed in the city of Rochester. In fact, in our area, Monroe County as well. So the combination of our philanthropy and partnership with our banking creates an opportunity to really make a contribution with respect to the social determinants of health. That said, at the end of the day, as we mentioned in the previous question, the ESL, no matter how much philanthropy and banking we do, aren't going to solve those problems on our own. So the need for collaboration across systems, across sectors are critical because of that interdependency and the interlocking nature of those multiple issues that, again, all, I think in many ways are a legacy of structural racism, a legacy of our country never having corrected the disparity that was set up intentionally in the time of chattel slavery.
Others care to offer work that you're doing across this range of issues that are trying to help us make progress? As we're thinking about that question, one of the powerful concepts that I came acquainted with some years back with respect to conversations about racial equity is a concept called the Black-White Dyad, that sometimes conversations about racial equity get kind of grounded into just the Black-White experience, and we lose out on some of the intersectionality and the dynamism that defines communities like ours. A question came in about limited English proficiency and about anything that we're doing for language access for some of the institutions. Does anybody have anything to share about work that you might be doing with respect to language access for the products that are being offered? Or the importance?
So one of the things we are trying to be very conscientious about is making sure that we're able to, as I said before, communicate in such a way that folks know, what we're doing, what we have to offer, how we want to help impact their lives. One of the things that we have invested in and has been a part of is our a language line, where if we have a client and we don't have someone in front of them to be able to speak their language, to being able to access a language line to help us and for that representative to speak with the individuals, in whatever language it is that they're speaking to, so that they feel comfortable, okay, well, maybe M&T doesn't have this person sitting in front of me, but they're getting someone on the phone who can directly speak with me in my language and help, whatever the situation is that they're going through in the office or on the phone with an M&T representative. So that's important that we have that language line available to our employees in case that situation comes up. The other thing is us being able to reach out and make sure that we have a diverse staff, and we look for individuals who speak various languages, and we certify them on staff by going through a process to make sure that they're able to communicate in that language in such a way that the customers understand and what it is they're trying to do, what they're trying to say. So that's important as well. So we, as I said before, we want to be able to be a reflection of the community we serve. So it's not, as you said, I think Ajamu mentioned a Black-White thing, but certainly to be able to communicate with all of the people that we serve. It's important that that is in place and that people know that. So how do we get that word out is making sure, you know, whether it's through our direct lines, our website, social media, through our branches, what have you. But it's important that people understand that and know that. We even have a multicultural lending leader who is in place, who works on, you know, developing and executing different lending strategies and strategies and how we reach that multicultural, the multicultural communities and those folks who have, you know, come from multicultural communities and speak different languages. So that's very important, and that we remember to have something like that in place. And we're
Excellent.
always trying to find other ways to be able to communicate as well.
Absolutely, Beverly. Thank you for the work that you guys are doing in that arena, because if we're not thoughtful about how we communicate with the broad spectrum of folks that are in our community, we certainly miss some huge opportunities. John, before we lose you, I did want to ask you, kind of returning back to Jerome's earlier address, this notion of the will to do the work. These challenges are still present with us. And so that suggests that something has been missing. What do you think is preventing us from making the kind of progress that we need to make? And can you just reflect on us, with us rather, as you diagnose what the challenges have been, what some opportunities might be for us to overcome that challenge?
Yeah, again, the will is so critical. As part of the human family, we all know, regardless of whatever faith we are part of, what family we're part of, we know a part of being human is being committed to something, having that sense of purpose, having that sense of will. And we know we've all experienced in life certain things that we didn't think were possible, or someone told us wasn't possible, yet we committed to it and made it happen. Same is the case for addressing, it's not easy, structural racism, addressing these disparities, but it's a type of challenge. If we really commit to it, then and follow that with resources, follow that with the time to study and learn, follow that with really looking at data to understand the challenge, and a commitment to take some risks, the commitment to recognize that there will be some costs and it's worth it, is really what's required to move past this. I think in many ways, and again, and Simeon, you're the student of history. I learned from you, but you know, just oversimplified in the history of America, there were several points in American history where, including Reconstruction being, for example, the most notable, where America realized that in order to truly include and embrace those former slaves at the time, there would be some corrective action needed to do to support empowerment. And that was done for a while. And unfortunately, in the name of compromise, political compromise, et cetera, those powers were taken away to, you know, instead support inclusion of other Southerners who wanted to be at the table. And so that spirit, the commitment to white supremacy, the commitment to discrimination, has allowed those disparities to perpetuate far too long. There's an opportunity for us as businesses, as individuals, as government, as society, to really make a true commitment. Again, a commitment that's not, well, hey, until it costs me, or hey, until it feels risky, but a true commitment to change, to support equity in our community. And again, it'll take learning, it'll take looking at data, it'll take commitment, it'll take resources. It'll also take a shared vision such that we truly believe that there's a greater, you know, we just passed MLK Day, right? That we really truly share a dream, a vision for a higher United States, a higher Greater Rochester community that truly is equitable, and believing in that and moving deliberately towards that. I think it's 100% possible, but we've all got to commit it and step into it. So.
Terrific. John, well, thanks for being with us today. We really appreciate having you here, man.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
Let me just pause for a quick PSA that just got dropped into the chat. There will be a short survey from this morning's session that'll be coming up. Please take a moment to complete it so that ABC can get all the feedback so that as they continue to produce these kinds of wonderful events, they get even better and better. With that, Robin, if I can turn to you to answer that same question, what has been holding us from making the kind of progress that we want to make? What's holding these conditions in place from your perspective?
Well, I think that we can always look to the structural barriers that we've created for ourselves. And I think Monroe County is very much mired in its segregation. And that segregation was designed to facilitate the hoarding of resources within the confines of very small and largely homogeneously white areas. In Monroe County, we're home to 5 of the top 50 segregating educational borders of the country, a report recently found. And 3 of those 5 districts have boundaries within the town of Brighton. And I don't think people are generally aware of this, but Brighton is home to 5 separate school districts: Brighton Central School District, Pittsford Central School District, Penfield Central School District, Rush Henrietta, and Wheatland Child School Districts. And those very small compartmentalized school district borders serve as literal boundaries for the equitable distribution of resources. And I think that if we truly believe the idea that your zip code shouldn't determine your access to opportunity in life, we need to critically look at some of the structural and land uses that we've limited ourselves to in Monroe County, and be bold enough to be reparative and restorative when we address the equitable distribution of resources.
Brennan, you were in Rochester, you engaged with a lot of folks, you did work both as in the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, but also as an advocate in our community. You've seen a lot. What do you share with us your perspective on what's been holding these conditions in place?
I think it shouldn't be lost on us in the reflection and observance of MLK Day that the Fair Housing Act was not passed. The political will did not exist to pass the Fair Housing Act until his assassination. And I think we see similar patterns throughout our history as a country, as a political collective, that we are reactive, and too often reactive to death or trauma and loss within the Black community specifically. And my hope is that even if some of that response or reactivity has happened, there is now a considerable amount of energy and effort. And as Robin reflected earlier, and I will continue to hit home, representation matters. And also she said that, you know, as it is in the preamble of our code of ethics, land is under all and land is power. And getting involved and participating is power. And the more that we can make, whether it's the real estate profession or the homeowners across our country, reflective of the population of the United States, more people come to the table and we can work through those issues. You know, housing, the racial wealth gap, these are complicated issues, no doubt. A lot of them with, you know, complex legal or policy frameworks that we have to take into consideration. A lot of different stakeholders, some at different ends of the spectrum, but being able to get people to the table to engage is really important. I think that I will do one last plug, and if I have another chance, I'll do it again, for Rochester Realtors, right? Folks within our community, and we mentioned language access earlier. There is not just a Black caucus, there's also a Hispanic caucus in the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, and there are more. There's also a newly named Pride Caucus. You know, there are folks in our community who are taking up the space that they should be taking up, who are recruiting more folks to engage in that profession, in that discourse and discussion, to be heard and to participate. And the more that we can do that, because realtors don't just sell real estate, they're involved in the community. They're going the extra mile with their blood, sweat, and tears with clients in the community to get them into homes, but then to go out and be active in our community development activities, in our, just community engagement overall. So I'll say that, there is a real untapped potential and force of folks that, as Ajamu was saying, he said, unfortunately, we lost me. You haven't lost me. I'm still very much here in Rochester, but that table is open. And how do we have that table and make sure that, as I see, realtors are really great practitioners on the ground and key players who can help inform policy, help inform banks they're using their products daily. So that's something that that's the pitch that I'll make today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that pitch. I know that last summer, you and I and my good friends, Chris and Ty Thomas, were hanging out on Juneteenth to celebrate with the caucus and for the realtors. And those are real opportunities that actually do matter to invest in community and find those spaces to bring people together. There's a question that came in, so I do want to circle back to this question of language. The question, I'm actually going to frame this as a suggestion, maybe, unless someone knows otherwise. But perhaps it would be useful to have some research around client satisfaction between using a language line or having a bilingual, bicultural interpreter in person. And I think one of the key challenges here, of course, is a scope and scale challenge. And so having the line is one way of dealing with that, but I'll put that out as a suggestion and give anybody on the panel an opportunity to respond to this idea of doing some research around bilingual, bicultural interpreters in person versus the language line, if anybody has any comments on it.
I think having the in-person is always going to be the best way to go. But when you don't have that in person, certainly you need a backup and a backup to the backup. Having the in person is always going to be better. That person sees you, they can feel you, touch you, and feel more comfortable, with you in front of them, as opposed to a language line. But if there is not a person there to work with, we want to have some sort of backup to be able, we don't want that person to walk out the door feeling hopeless and, these folks can't help me, so I think the in-person though is always going to be the best way to go. And that's why it's important to be able to do that outreach and try and hire and bring folks on who can sit in that position.
Thanks so much, Beverly. There's a question that's come in, and I want to share the term and just see if anybody's familiar with it before we go deeper into the question. A credit invisible person. Anybody familiar with that term? So Brennan, why don't I send this your way then? How does someone who has good credit, but is credit invisible, meaning they haven't charged anything, their car is paid off, and because they don't hold active credit, the bank now indicates that they represent a risk. How does one correct this without jeopardizing their credit and undermining their ability to get loans in the future? I know it's a practitioner's question, but
yeah, I might defer to others if they have a better sense of that. But I know, at least from NAR's perspective, that's a big issue that we're looking into, and how do we work with credit agencies and federal agencies to write better policy, to come up with better systems, understanding that our current credit scoring, credit modeling, credit systems don't serve those people and are holding them back when that's someone who shouldn't be harmed by that. So I'll defer the particular points of that question to others, but that's what I would say on
that. And Beverly, did you have a response or?
Yes, actually, I'm gonna refer back to my days when I was an affordable housing officer, and that's when there were folks that would come in and they want to get a loan, of course, but the banks do have ways, the financial institutions have ways to deal with that, and there's such a thing called alternative credit. Now, I am not the person that's working in that position to work with folks and advise them at this point in time, but I'm just I'm aware of the fact that they look for alternative credit in which you can present, and they come in different forms. which will help you to be able to, qualify if you have sufficient alternative credit and how that works to be able to qualify for a loan. So I that's as much detail as I can provide you, not being the mortgage person or the lender that's currently taking on that task.
And we have the questioner, and so we can connect you with some resources to try to get that question answered. I'm sure Jerome and the team have some relationships that should be able to get that answered. Our last question, I'm going to give everybody a chance to respond to this, and we want to end on, I think, a note of optimism about what we can do together. The theme of this conference is empowerment, equity, and as Jerome has put an emphasis, accountability, the journey ahead. In order to close the racial wealth gap, we surely have to empower people who have been hit on the margins. And we must do so in a manner that delivers equity. The report that was referenced earlier indicated that only 11.32% of mortgages were issued to BIPOC lenders from 2016 to 2021. The BIPOC population of Rochester is 24%. From an accountability point of view, and also from a we can do this Rochester point of view, how can we get that number to 24%? And is that even the right number? Should it be higher to redress the challenges of yesteryear? Let's end on a note of what we can do together. Each person can respond. And the three of you, we have 3 minutes.
I'll go briefly, and I'll start with also that credit issue. I thought, again, our co-chair of the Fair Housing Committee was part of the finance industry and shared that for them, the clients in the Mennonite population who don't have access to credit or don't have normal lines of credit, but have a lot of cash and other ways to move things, would get loan services that were specifically tailored to them by that financial institution. And so where I'll drive that forward is say that our local institutions do this for specific populations that are credit invisible in other ways. That means that they can do it, and we need to be more creative and thoughtful of how we do it for other populations, right? And that collectively, we need to be more creative, we need to get involved, and we need to be talking to each other like we are right now to kind of ameliorate these issues.
Thank you so much, Brennan. Beverly?
Having more conversations in the community about the challenges that folks are going through. And I'm not talking about us professionals sitting around here at the table, but us professionals talking with folks in the community is going to help a lot with that. But we have to be open. We have to be understanding. We have to be willing to learn, and we have to be willing to be holding ourselves accountable for what we have in place that may be not helping to address those issues, to help that number go from 11 to 24%, or whatever the case may be, but certainly a lot higher than what it is. But we've got to be willing, and we've got to get rid of the fear that we're not able to help them for whatever stereotypical thought that you may have learned over the years, but have to be willing to be understanding and willing to come up with a solution, as opposed to giving up and saying, oh, no, well, we can't help them. We have to be willing to get creative in our thinking and how do we help.
Absolutely. Robin?
Yeah, I really revert back to some of the suggestions that NAREB made. We need to look at our lending models and make sure we're eliminating those barriers that don't have any basis in our outcomes with regard to the risks in lending. So we eliminate those loan level price adjustments that we eliminate penalty fees to access down payment assistance. We recalculate the impact of student loan debt. We leverage special purpose credit programs that we've discussed here today when we end discriminatory and abusive appraisal practices. And finally, just fix the out of date and broken housing finance system that we have currently so that we have equitable access to wealth.
Robin, thank you so much. And thank you all for having been on this panel. There was one comment that came in that I do think is an important one. to know this person asked for us to make the connection of home ownership in a red line neighborhood, and begs the question of how that builds wealth. Wonders about commercial investment that's hard to, without which it is really difficult to grasp wealth. And this particular writer points to the Southeast neighborhood benefiting through College Town as an example. And while actually College Town hasn't been all that economically viable, I think it is an interesting point and one for us to end on here that asks an important question about the ecosystem that a community represents. And it is a fair point that investing in neighborhoods that have been traditionally marginalized, that have been underinvested only through home ownership, doesn't necessarily create the economic gains that I think many of us would hope for. And so it really does require for us to operate on all the gears. And that includes commercial investment, it includes residential investment, and it includes making sure that the political systems that we have in place are truly democratic and open for democratic, small d, I want to be clear, and open for folks to engage and lay a claim of ownership on community. We often talk about equity as in interpersonal terms, being nice to each other, but equity is also about ownership. So I think that I have tap danced enough to get Jerome back from the lavatory, and I will hand the baton back over to you, Jerome, so that we can take it from here.
Is that what it is? The lavatory? Thank you, Simeon. Hey, you know, we don't plan, but we improvise.
That's right, we get it done.
Yeah, you know, and you know, we put a lot of effort in trying to be on time, and it's about 2.5 minutes before 11, and we're gonna get out at 11 o'clock. So, or maybe before. From my point of view, just thank you, panelists, Robin, Beverly, Brennon, and Ajamu in his absence. Thank you so much for, you know, sharing your time and your expertise with us and your personal commitment. That first question is an important one that you answered today. And of course, you know, my partner in good, Simeon. You know, people have partners in crime. I got partners in good. In Simeon Banister. Just thank you so much, all of you, for, you know, just making this very, very rich. We want to thank all of our sponsors, and again, you know, after I'm finished speaking, we're going to put up that slideshow with our sponsors again. The participants have said they like the playlist, so we're going to run that too. So thank you to all of the attendees, all of you who have taken time out of your busy morning. For me, it's still MLK week, and you know, Dr. King's legacy just looms so large, you know. And that question: do we have the will? Do we have the will? I hope that stays with all of us, because we all have agency, and wherever place or stage you are, you know, the establishment that you work in, you know, ask, what are we doing to close the racial wealth gap? You know, what can we do? What should we do? And, you know, force our colleagues and our leaders to that, you know, as Brennon said, it's a moral question. It's a moral question. So we're grateful for all of that. A couple reminders this afternoon, we're not done. We are anchoring the virtual part of our conference with an extremely necessary conversation on violence prevention. And that is going to come up at 2 o'clock with a keynote, Dr. Altimer, and then equally talented panel of people working in the field of violence prevention. So stay tuned. You can log back in a little early if you'd like at 1:45 or so. We're going to, again, as we did, start promptly at 2 o'clock. We're grateful for that. I'd be remiss of me if I didn't say, as ABC's CEO, that one way of helping to close the racial wealth gap is employment. We have about 60 or 70 open positions here in Action for a Better Community, largely in our early childhood area. We're lacking teachers. So if you love children, if you have a teaching certification, or if you're interested in just helping and being a part of the ABC family, please go to abcinfo.org and see if there's an opportunity for you or a family member, somebody lives on your street. We are actively recruiting to try to increase our capacity for what we do in the community. And next week, Thursday the 26th, we conclude our conference with our awards breakfast, which is going to be held at the Memorial Art Gallery at 8 a.m. There's some tickets still available, and those are also, you can get those at our website at abcinfo.org. It is now 11 o'clock, and this ends our morning session. Take your break, do what you need to do, and see you back at 2 o'clock. Peace.